Wait. Wait. Hold up. Holy fuck. Do you even realize what just happened to you? Because the people who used to look through you, the people who used to talk around you, the people who treated you like you were just another face in a room full of forgettable people, are suddenly looking at you differently now. And no, it is not your imagination. They feel it. They may not say it. They may not admit it. They may not even understand it themselves, but they feel it. Because something about your presence changed. Something about your silence changed. Something about your energy became heavier. Something about the way you walk into a room now feels like you no longer need that room to accept you. And that right there is what scares people. Because most people only feel comfortable around the version of you they can control. The wounded version, the insecure version, the over-explaining version, the version that kept shrinking itself so other people could feel bigger standing next to you. That was the version they understood. That was the version they liked. Because that version of you asked for permission. But this version does not ask. This version simply arrives. And that is why the game changed. Because people can handle your pain. People can handle your struggle. People can even handle watching you fail. But what people cannot handle is watching someone they underestimated become someone they can no longer ignore. That hits differently. Because deep down, some people never wanted to see you rise. They wanted to see you survive. Just enough to stay alive, just enough to stay available, just enough to remain harmless, but not enough to become powerful. Never that. Because the second you become powerful, their entire illusion breaks. And the illusion was this, that you needed them more than they needed you. That you would always be the one chasing, the one proving, the one explaining, the one trying to be understood, but somewhere in your pain, you stopped doing that. Quietly, you stopped begging people to see your worth. You stopped trying to force connection. You stopped wasting energy explaining your soul to people committed to misunderstanding you. And the moment you did that, everything shifted. Because pain did something strange to you. It did not destroy you. It introduced you to yourself. And once that happened, you became dangerous. Not loud dangerous, not reckless dangerous, not fake dangerous, the worst kind, silent dangerous. Because silent people who have suffered deeply move differently. They speak less, they watch more, they feel everything, and they no longer waste themselves on people who only loved the broken version of them. That is what people feel now when they look at you. They cannot explain it. They just know something changed. And the truth? You did not suddenly become arrogant. You simply stopped doubting yourself. You did not suddenly become cold. You simply learned that not everybody deserves access to your heart. You did not suddenly become distant. You simply realized your energy is too expensive to keep giving away for free. And once a person learns that, their entire life begins to change. Because the world treats you differently when you stop treating yourself like an option. Read that again. The world treats you differently when you stop treating yourself like an option. That is why the same people who ignored your voice now study your silence. That is why the same people who dismissed your presence now notice when you are gone. That is why the same people who once made you feel small now feel uncomfortable standing next to you. Because they can sense what happened. You finally saw yourself. And once a person truly sees themselves, they can never be handled the same way again. That is the shift. That is the moment the outsider stops being the outsider. Because being an outsider was never your weakness. It was your preparation. While they were busy fitting in, you were learning yourself. While they were busy performing, you were evolving. While they were busy chasing approval, you were becoming someone approval could never define. And now they can feel that you no longer need the crowd, and nothing makes people more uncomfortable than someone who no longer needs validation to feel valuable. Because that kind of person cannot be manipulated, cannot be controlled, cannot be reduced, cannot be intimidated. And that is exactly why your energy now feels royal. Because kings are not crowned when people clap for them. Kings are crowned when they survive everything that was supposed to break them. And that is what happened to you. You survived versions of pain that nobody even knew you were carrying. You smiled while bleeding. You stayed calm while breaking. You kept moving while losing pieces of yourself that nobody ever thanked you for sacrificing. And instead of collapsing, you transformed. That is why this feels different. Because this is not confidence. This is earned presence. This is what happens when someone who was once overlooked finally becomes impossible to overlook. And the people around you know it. That is why some stare. That is why some pull away. That is why some suddenly act strange around you. Because your energy reminds them that they misjudged you. And some people can never handle being wrong about you, especially after they made your weakness part of their comfort. But now you are no longer the person they thought they knew. Now you are the person they secretly fear becoming. Because you walked through darkness and came back carrying power. Not borrowed power, not fake power, not loud power. Real power. The kind that never needs to announce itself. The kind that changes the room without saying a word. The kind that makes people feel your presence before you even speak. And that is when the outsider becomes the king. Not because people gave him a throne, but because he stopped asking anyone if he deserved one. So if life feels strange right now, if people feel strange right now, if the room feels different when you enter, you are not imagining it. They feel your transformation. They feel your silence. They feel your power. And deep down, they know the truth. You did not just survive this game. You became the one who now controls it. And once you become the one who controls it, you start seeing everything differently. You stop chasing attention because you finally understand. Attention is cheap. Anybody can be noticed. Anybody can be loud. Anybody can pretend. Anybody can perform. But presence is different. Presence cannot be copied. Presence cannot be borrowed. Presence cannot be faked by somebody who has never survived their own destruction. And that is why people keep staring at you now. Because your energy no longer asks for space. It takes it without force, without noise, without trying. That kind of power makes people nervous. Because most people are used to controlling others through approval. They know how to handle someone who wants to be liked. They know how to handle someone who wants to fit in. They know how to handle someone who fears being alone. But they do not know what to do with someone who became whole in isolation. That person is different. That person cannot be pulled back by guilt, cannot be slowed down by rejection, cannot be manipulated by silence. Because the silence that used to hurt you became the place where you built yourself. That is what they cannot understand. They thought loneliness would weaken you. They thought betrayal would crush you. They thought heartbreak would ruin you. They thought being overlooked would make you disappear. But instead, it stripped away every fragile piece that was never meant to survive your next level. And when all those weak pieces fell away, what remained was the version of you they never prepared for. The version that no longer folds, the version that no longer waits, the version that no longer explains why they deserve respect. Because respect feels different when it no longer needs to be requested. And that is the part that changes the whole room. Because people can sense when someone has stopped negotiating with their own worth. That energy hits before words do. That energy enters before your body does. That energy says, I know exactly who I am now. And people hear that even when you never say a single word. That is why the same people who once ignored your value now watch your every move. Because your growth became undeniable. And nothing makes people uncomfortable faster than undeniable change. Especially when they benefited from the old version of you. The old version was easier. Easier to dismiss. Easier to use. Easier to underestimate. Easier to keep beneath them. But this version sees everything. This version notices fake smiles. This version notices hidden jealousy. This version notices the subtle shift in people's and once you become the one who controls it, you start seeing everything differently. You stop chasing attention because you finally understand attention is cheap. Anybody can be noticed. Anybody can be loud. Anybody can pretend. Anybody can perform. But presence is different. Presence cannot be copied. Presence cannot be borrowed. Presence cannot be faked by somebody who has never survived their own destruction. And that is why people keep staring at you now. Because your energy no longer asks for space. It takes it. Without force. Without noise. Without trying. That kind of power makes people nervous. Because most people are used to controlling others through approval. They know how to handle someone who wants to be liked. They know how to handle someone who wants to fit in. They know how to handle someone who fears being alone. But they do not know what to do with someone who became whole in isolation. That person is different. That person cannot be pulled back by guilt, cannot be slowed down by rejection, cannot be manipulated by silence. Because the silence that used to hurt you became the place where you built yourself. That is what they cannot understand. They thought loneliness would weaken you. They thought betrayal would crush you. They thought heartbreak would ruin you. They thought being overlooked would make you disappear. But instead, it stripped away every fragile piece that was never meant to survive your next level. And when all those weak pieces fell away, what remained was the version of you they never prepared for. The version that no longer folds, the version that no longer waits, the version that no longer explains why they deserve respect. Because respect feels different when it no longer needs to be requested. And that is the part that changes the whole room. Because people can sense when someone has stopped negotiating with their own worth. That energy hits before words do. That energy enters before your body does. That energy says, I know exactly who I am now. And people hear that even when you never say a single word. That is why the same people who once ignored your value now watch your every move. Because your growth became undeniable. And nothing makes people uncomfortable faster than undeniable change. Especially when they benefited from the old version of you. The old version was easier to dismiss, easier to use, easier to underestimate, easier to keep beneath them. But this version sees everything. This version notices fake smiles. This version notices hidden jealousy. This version notices the subtle shift in people's tone when they realize you are no longer beneath them. And once you see that, you can never unsee it. That is the real awakening, not becoming stronger, becoming aware, because awareness changes everything. Once you see who truly supports you, you stop forcing loyalty. Once you see who secretly envies you, you stop off. And evolution always makes old connections uncomfortable. Because not everybody is meant to come with you when you become who you were meant to be. Some people were only assigned to meet the old you, not this one. Not the one who finally understands their own power. Not the one who finally stopped apologizing for their own existence. Not the one who finally realized they were never too much. They were simply standing in rooms too small for them. And once you understand that, you stop shrinking forever. You stop dimming your light for insecure people. You stop lowering your voice for fragile people. You stop betraying yourself just to keep other people comfortable. Because comfort is how people stay ordinary. And you were never built for ordinary. That is why your whole life had to break first. Because sometimes destruction is just preparation for authority. Sometimes pain is just preparation for vision. Sometimes isolation is just preparation for power. And sometimes being the outsider was never punishment. It was training. Training for the day you would stop standing outside the game and become the one everyone else has to answer to. They came to awaken. And once you understand that, you stop resenting the pain that created your power. Because now you see it. Without that pain, you would still be chasing people who never deserved your energy. Without that pain, you would still be asking permission to be yourself. Without that pain, you would still be living smaller than your spirit was meant to live. But now your presence says something else. Now your energy says, I know exactly what I survived. And there is something terrifying about a person who knows exactly what they survived. Because that person is no longer easy to break. That person is no longer easy to fool. That person is no longer easy to replace. And deep down, the people around you know that. That is why the game changed. Because you did not just rise, you became someone the old version of you would not even recognize. And that kind of transformation does not just earn attention, it commands it. Because you were never meant to stay the outsider forever. You were only meant to stay there long enough to learn the entire game from the shadows. And now that you understand the game, you are no longer standing outside it. Now, you are the one they watch from inside it. And now that they are watching you, you start noticing something even deeper. Not everyone is watching you the same way. Some are watching with curiosity, some with admiration, some with confusion, but some are watching with discomfort. Because your rise does not just inspire people, it exposes people. It forces them to see what they refused to become. And that is why your existence now feels heavier than before. You are no longer just a person in the room. You are a reflection, a mirror. And mirrors make people uncomfortable when they do not like what they see in themselves. That is the hidden truth of your transformation. It was never only about you becoming stronger. It was about you becoming undeniable. And undeniable people change the atmosphere around them without trying. You do not need to speak loudly. You do not need to prove anything. You do not need to announce your arrival. Because your energy already says it all. I am not who I used to be. And that sentence alone rewrites how people treat you. But here is the part most people never prepare for. When you rise like this, you lose access to certain versions of people. not because they disappear, but because the connection no longer operates at the same frequency. Some people only knew how to relate to you when you were unsure, when you were reachable, when you were explainable, when you were predictable. But growth removes predictability, and unpredictability creates distance, so suddenly you are not as accessible as before, not emotionally, not mentally, not energetically. And people mistake that for arrogance. But it is not arrogance. It is alignment. You are no longer available for connections that drain your direction because you finally understand something simple but powerful. Not every bond deserves continuation. Not every relationship deserves maintenance. Not every presence deserves proximity. And once you accept that, your world becomes quieter, not empty, clear. And clarity is dangerous because it removes excuses. You stop saying, maybe they'll change. You stop saying, maybe I misunderstood them. You stop saying, maybe I'm the problem. And instead, you start seeing patterns. You start seeing repetition. You start seeing intention. You start seeing truth. And truth is not always gentle, but it is freeing, because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. That is where your power sharpens again, not from gaining more, but from losing what was never aligned with you. And the strange part is, the more you lose what was fake, the more real you become. That is why your life feels different now, because your foundation is no longer built on approval or attention. It is built on awareness. And awareness changes everything. You no longer react the same way. You no longer chase the same things. You no longer get pulled into the same cycles. You move differently now. More precise, more intentional, more controlled. And control is what people feel before they understand you. They feel that you are no longer reactive. You are deliberate, and deliberate people cannot be easily influenced. They cannot be rushed. They cannot be guilted. They cannot be distracted. That is why your presence now feels like silence with weight, because there is something about you now that does not overextend. It observes first. It understands first. It decides carefully. And that alone puts you ahead of most people who still live emotionally chaotic lives. But the real shift, the one nobody sees coming, is that you stopped needing to be understood. That is where everything flips. Because the moment you stop needing understanding from people who were never willing to give it, you stop leaking energy. You stop explaining yourself. You stop proving your intentions. You stop defending your existence. And that is when people notice you more than ever. Because now there is mystery, and mystery draws attention even from people who do not deserve access. But you are no longer giving access freely. You learn the cost of access. You learn the price of trust. You learn that not everyone who looks close is actually close. And now, you choose differently. You observe more than you speak. You protect more than you expose. You build more than you broadcast. And slowly, without announcing it, you become someone unshakable. Not because life stopped testing you, but because you stopped breaking every time it did. That is the final evolution, when pressure no longer collapses you. It defines you. And now, you are defined differently, not as the outsider anymore, but as the one who learned the entire system and stepped above it.